Special thanks to Moonfly71 for allowing this story to be shared. Check the description for their details, and now on to the story. Humans are a selfish species, you say? Sounds like you've been listening to humans tell their stories then. Almost all of their stories and histories have at least some cautionary tale about how they can't be trusted, how, no matter what, humans are out for themselves. Kind of sad, really. Don't pay much attention to them. They're just trying to be helpful, in their own strange way. They aren't entirely wrong. Humans can be some of the most selfish creatures you've ever met, but that's by individual the same as any other species, really. Their government can be vicious and crude, and before they united, they fought many wars against each other over petty resources and feuds, spurred by the blind ambition of a few. So, in a way, I suppose humans are selfish creatures at heart. They're also the most selfless beings in the galaxy, but the stories about that aren't something humans are going to tell you, and if they did, they'll be heavily altered into some kind of cautionary tale or other. Silly humans, as if we could forget. Take the Zathrek War about 100 to 150 Earth years or so ago. The Zathrek are a brutal reptilian race, and back then, their empire spanned about 30 systems. Their might was undisputed, their forces so impressive, and the systems they took so insignificant that the Galactic Council decided it was better to let them be than risk a costly war with them over such paltry offenses. This continued for a few decades. Then the Zathrek began to make aggressive overtures towards the Grani. The Grani are a mostly non-aggressive species, as you probably know. Brilliant bioengineers, but they use their knowledge to create better livestock and other helpful plant and animal mutations. They controlled about half a dozen planets, barely a quarter of their system, and maintained a small but mostly profitable trade with a few other races. One of their most profitable trade partners were the humans, still relatively new to the galactic stage. Already they were recognized the galaxy over for their creativity and ingenuity, if not their technological superiority. Humans may not invent the most amazing and effective technology, but the galaxy had already seen that they could utilize and improve upon existing tech in a way no other species quite could. I don't know quite why the humans were the best customers of the Grani. At the beginning of their hyper-travel, when they were still inexperienced, the Grani's bioengineers were hired to help adapt the human plants and livestock to thrive better in hostile environments. But by the time 2 decades had passed, humans could more than carry out the task themselves for much cheaper. Not with the same artistic and masterful quality as the Grani, but surely more than was necessary to be successful. And yet, still, the humans were the Grani's greatest customers. The human government even subsidized the Grani imports, making them cheaper than human-grown products. And yet, no more than the standard human complaining came from the private bioengineering sector, which, let me tell you, is strange indeed for humanity. Anyways, the Zathrek began their invasions like they always did back then. First, they colonized the closest neutral moons they could without violating private space. The first 3 times they did this, their opponents might have been surprised, but by now, the Grani and every other race knew it was the beginning of the end for the peaceful bioengineers. While you might think that a species that dabbled with DNA on a daily basis would have some terrifying beasts hidden away for defense, the Grani did not. They were simply inquisitive, creative beings. They never harmed anyone and had a simple philosophy of peace. They had no valuable resources that anyone would want and were struck with terror and surprise when the Zathrek began to slowly encroach on their territory. They knew it was the end. They decided to fight anyway, since their people would be killed or taken as slaves by the Zathrek in a cruel application of that species' survival of the fittest life philosophy and despicable religion. The poor small creatures had few weapons and fewer trained soldiers, and a pitiful number of either of those could actually hurt the weakest of Zathrek shock troops, let alone kill one. The Zathrek landed their first assault ships on the outlying Grani stations about 3 cycles after they built combat outposts on those outlying moons. Their forces were an overwhelming amount of overkill, and they swept through the first few stations like they were paper. The whole endeavor took out about 10 Grani outposts in roughly 3 brutal weeks. The Grani were shaking on their home planets and sent a begging plea to be allowed to surrender to the Zathrek. Their only reply was, Fight as well as you can, and pray you don't embarrass those who are already dead. You'll be able to receive their judgment soon. It was in those first 3 weeks that the Zathrek made the mistake that would result in their loss of the war and their entire empire. Because during their 7th boarding of a Grani station, a single human ship piloted by their reporters captured every single minute of the brutal slaughter caused by Zathrek warlust. They also caught the futile attempt to stem the inevitable by the small underarmed force of Grani. These humans caught every second of the battle, both inside and out, using non-combat camera drones largely ignored by the Zathrek as non-dangerous. And though they did indeed lack any weapon systems, the Zathrek could not have been more wrong. I'm sure the Zathrek still cursed the names of those poor commanders who gave the orders to not waste fire on the silly human toys. Not that anyone could blame them. No one could have predicted what was about to happen. Those drones beamed their footage directly to the human information stream called the Internet. The crew of reporters was there to observe the strangely beautiful, glowing algae the Grani had released onto local asteroid belts for fun, because they apparently created colors in the humans' visible spectrum that they had never seen before. Instead, the ship managed to catch the wholesale slaughter of the poor geneticists. The results were astounding. The humans were outraged. They saw these poor creatures, the Grani, fighting against insurmountable odds with no way of success, and their hearts went out to those brave little guys. Near the end of those 3 terrifying weeks, the Grani elected council got an astounding message from their single human ambassador, the same ambassador who had politely refused to leave when he was informed of the threat to their system and offered a chance to escape by his hosts. The message was simple. The humans would be sending aid so that the Grani could, in the words of the ambassador, not fall back on any necessary production because of these dumbass lizards. The Grani gratefully accepted the aid and prepared their shipyards and docks to receive what they assumed would be ships full of food supplies, backup generators, and maybe a few volunteer aid workers. Instead, when the human vessels appeared, they were not simple cargo freighters carrying food and supplies. They were dreadnoughts, 52 of them, carrying fleets of short-range fighters, heavy assault vehicles and weapons, approximately 500 individual types of assorted arms and armor, and over 100 battalions of fully prepared human shock troops trained in urban warfare. The Grani were, at first, fearful. They did not have a treaty of any sorts beyond the standard one provided by membership in the Galactic Council, and certainly no defense agreement of any kind. Could the humans be here to conquer while the Grani were weak? No, the humans said. They were here to help. Their engineers began to fortify Grani defenses and alter evacuation plans. Their troops bolstered the Grani forces in waves. Their generals, more experienced than the Grani, began to aid them in the creation of a solid defense. Even privately owned human scrap vessels pitched in, pulling the bodies of the dead Grani out of the wrecked space stations, working behind enemy lines at constant risk, just so that the Grani could bury their dead. So, as the Zathrek landed on the first Grani world, they found not a series of helpless cities with pitiful forces, but anti-spacecraft artillery and a few vessels from the human fleet that hit the ships as they tried to land, harassing and haranguing the Zathrek, but not able to stop their descent entirely. Once on the ground, while a bit confused, the Zathrek were more than prepared, they thought. The Grani may have had a little help and a few more ships than expected, but they were still the weak and cowardly beings they had been 3 weeks ago. The Zathrek kept thinking this even as they lost dozens of men to the mines that the human engineers, aided by newly trained Grani, had laid in every inch of the ground. When the Zathrek troops finally pierced through the minefields by sheer numbers, they found not screaming helpless civilians, but cities empty of everything but soldiers and fortifications. The humans, aided by the few Grani troops, waged a guerrilla war on that planet. They blew entire buildings to drop them on the Zathrek forces. They filled the narrow alleys with flames from human plasma throwers, hit the Zathrek whenever they stopped to sleep, and waylaid them at every turn. It took 5 months of fighting, but the Zathrek finally secured enough of the planet that they felt they could continue onward. Turning to the next planet in the line of Grani space, They found what the United Humans and Grani had done during those 5 months that they had bought. The humans, you see, didn't just come to help the Grani. They'd come to do something better than that. They'd come to teach the Grani to help themselves. Humans trained the Grani in warfare, churning out a larger Grani military than had ever existed. They showed them how to utilize all 4 of their manipulating appendages and thick, color-changing fur to shoot faster than repeating rifles and blend in with their environment. But they didn't stop there. The humans encouraged the Grani to fall back on their greatest strength, genetics. So it was that when the Zathrak attempted to land on the second Grani world, they fought not just human dreadnought and fighters, but great flying beasts that could live in the void of space. These giant reptilian, snake-like things were the size of a decent transport vessel, and they could become invisible. They'd been genetically modified to reflect no light when they did not want to, be undetectable in UV scanners, and have no body heat. They'd even rendered their electromagnetic fields barely noticeable. The things were based on some human myth that had fascinated the Grani scientists who had heard it, and when the humans told them they should create creatures for battle, it was the first thing that came to mind. These dragons exhaled plasma and poison and acid. Surviving an assault by one of these is only possible when your shields are up to deflect their blasts, and when they're working, you're perfectly safe. But that's where the Grani's second murder beast came in, insects that release a localized EMP field, fired onto ships using rockets with so little thrust and tech that it could pass through the shields. These things used stealth to make their way to the shield generators and crawled into every crack they could find, usually 250 per missile, 10 missiles per ship. Finding and stopping every one of those millimeter-long bugs was nigh impossible. I won't tell you about every single horror the human-inspired Grani unleashed. I'll tell you this, though. By the end of the war, the Zathrak weren't sure who scared them more, the tiny four-armed furry beings that designed such horrors, or the skinny, hairless bipeds who ripped through their forces, who didn't stop fighting till you put an entire magazine of plasma rounds into their armor. The tales they had of humans on what they call an adrenaline rush still haunt the nightmares of Zathrak children. Oh, and they didn't stop after they reconquered the Grani worlds that were taken. At least the humans didn't. The Grani were infinitely grateful to humanity, but were content to guard their borders with their dragons and tanglevines, and sentient asteroids do not ask, and let bygones be bygones. The humans respected this, but pushed forward on their own anyways. Freeing the Grani had taken about a year or two. The following incursion by the humans extended the war by 8 years, and it was very clear who was losing. It took the humans blowing a moon into the Zathrak homeworld for the scaly bastards to realize it was them, though. By then, the message was clear to the rest of the galaxy, though. The humans were scary, and you shouldn't piss them off. What wasn't clear, though, was why the humans were so pissed off. They didn't go on a rampage when the Dranmaki invaded Karlsgro 5 and 6 a few years before all this. Why did they care about the Grani so much? They didn't actually need anything from the Grani. They might have actually been better off doing all their genetics in-house. So why? What could possibly have made them come to the aid of these people? That's what the Grani elders asked the human leaders when they signed their first protection pact after the war. The human leaders looked puzzled by the questions. Apparently, to every human in the galaxy, the answer was obvious. "You helped us," the humans said, "when we were shipping our food to every planet and outpost straight from Earth. It was you who offered us a cheap way to feed our outposts. When we couldn't pay, you took our credit. When we needed something custom-made, you didn't complain, you were happy to help. Very few human colonies don't owe their lives to Grani work. Why wouldn't we come help our greatest friends?" The Grani were very surprised by this. Surely now, the humans and Grani were stalwart allies. Grani and humans trusted each other more than any other species in the galaxy after the war, but not before. Before, the Grani were simply doing regular business. The humans paid them standard rates and never failed to pay before their famine, and Galactic Coalition regulations had fair rules about giving credit. The Grani had just been following the rules, nothing mighty or friendly. But to humans, that didn't matter. The Grani products kept them alive. Too many humans had vivid memories of a four-armed furry being arriving on the planet and magically fixing the food problem. It was only fair to give them good business and to help them when they needed aid, at least in their eyes. It wasn't like the humans had bled alone on those streets, they said. The Grani had bled and died too. They'd just given them a little boost and then taught the Zathrek why you shouldn't touch human friends, basically the same as what the Grani had done in their eyes. See, if you go back into human history, you'll see a number of wars where countries that had no treaty stuck their noses in to help one side or another because they felt bad for them or just wanted to see the little guy win. The humans say this is greedy, selfish. They need to leave conflicts that aren't theirs alone, not try to profit or make themselves look better. The Grani don't say that though, or the Volcat when the humans helped them during the Ceres plague a few years later, or the Gurand when the humans helped end their civil war via their diplomats. Humans are just selfless like that. They stick their noses in your business, and they don't like it when they see conflict or problems. I think that their warnings that they're selfish at heart are born from their selflessness. Humans have done things that they aren't proud of over the years, things that are selfish in nature, and they want to make sure that no one gets burned or caught by surprise by what they fear is inevitable. But warning people of their faults at the detriment of popular opinion sounds pretty selfless to me. Not that it works very well. They don't get away with it much nowadays. See, everyone hires humans to build their stuff, and they always insist on hiring Grani geneticists for any bio work. Since humans don't trust anybody else, and most crap needs at least a bit of that nowadays. Thing is, the Grani don't let them get away with their self-deprecating stories as much as they could if they were alone. Surprised your human friend managed to get a few of his off. Grani must have been working late that night.